you wake to a sound that is almost a whisper. Soft beads of rain ticking themselves across the broad glass of the observation alcove, as if someone far below is tapping out a slow, patient rhythm. The refuge inhales and exhales around you. Its timber settles with a low, familiar murmur that has the steadiness of a heartbeat. Lily is awake long before words. She lies for a moment listening to that small percussion, letting the hum of the house come into step with her own breath. If this kind of quiet comforts you, stay with us for the drift. The first thing she does is boil water. The kettle's note is thin and precise, the single clear sound that divides night from day. Lily measures the bergamot with fingers that know the exact scoop. 2 pinches, a sliver of dried orange peel pressed between thumb and forefinger. And she tucks a scrap of chamomile beside it, because there is a private kindness in soft things. Steam wakes the teapot. The scent is an immediate unraveling of sleep. Citrus that is not sharp but rounded like a coin softened by years in a pocket. And a sleepy floral that reminds Lily of windowsill mornings when she was small and someone else had already started the day. She lights a row of small panels along the shelf. Glass squares set in brass frames, each one with a wick and a soft oil that burns like memory. The light is not bright. It is the color of late afternoon even at dawn, the warm tilt of honey. The little lamps make the kitchen's stone and timber glow as if the room has drifted into a photograph of itself. She lays out 2 mugs, one a chipped brown thing with a hairline on the rim that the twins adore, the other a ribbed gray cup, her own, that has a score of tiny marks on the handle like a map. Objects keep people as much as people keep objects. Lily thinks of that as she sets the cup beside the kettle. Outside, beyond the glass, the world is a sea of cloud. A broad, white swell rolls and folds beneath the refuge, and from time to time a band of darker thunderclouds flares in the distance, rimmed with the pale light of the morning. The alcove's glass holds mist in small threads. When the wind runs the surface, they collect and slide like a hand across skin, leaving damp tracings. Down in the folds, the thunder is constant and far away, a patter rather than a threat. An orchestra of distant weather that makes the refuge feel protected and untouchable all at once. The first neighbor arrives soon after. Seamus comes with a cane that is more a friend than an aid. It clicks in a rhythm he knows by heart on the flagstones as he climbs the short stair from his own small room. He has a bag over his shoulder that clinks faintly. Tools, a length of leather, maybe a bit of wire. And when he enters the common room, his presence is the sort of steady thing that smooths the air. He does not need to say much. He peels his gloves off with the economy of someone who has done it 1,000 times, and who believes gloves should never be a show. "Morning, Lily," he says. His voice curls around the corners of the kitchen. He perches on the bench next to the stove, lets the cane lean against the wood, and opens his bag without ceremony. "Found something yesterday," he adds, as if the finding is the important part. He produces, with a small flourish that makes the twins giggle, a brass button the size of a penny, simple and dented and dusted with old glue. "Thought it might be useful," he says. It sits there, humble and ready, like a promise. Rose arrives with soil on her palms and a sprout tucked into the pocket of her apron. She always smells, in a way Lily can name before she sees her, of peat and lemon peel, and the faint sourness of compost tea. She sets the pot down and lifts the leaves to the light as if greeting an old friend. Her hands are quick and sure. She rubs an errant leaf of dust into the palm and murmurs something to the seedling. Managed to coax the winter radish through the trough at the windward ledge, she says. She has a quiet pride that is not loud so much as insistent, the sort that plants have when they push through stone. Mara and Joss, the twins, arrive last, tumbling in as if there is a private map of the refuge that always points them toward mischief. They carry things that make soft, clattering sounds, a spool of thread a little too large for their hands, 2 strips of translucent paper, and a handful of sugar crystals they have saved from a festival some time ago. Their cheeks are pinched pink with the climb. A curl of breath comes out of them in 2 neat puffs. Already they are planning to hang little ornaments from the rafters, cloud windows they call them, cut from sugar and oiled parchment. Things to catch light and throw it back in little shards. The kitchen becomes a little theater of small rituals. The bread is made on the back of a plate. A simple steamed bun that Lily calls cloud bread, for the way it swells and softens beneath the lid. She folds a spiced filling. Cinnamon, a hint of clove, a spoonful of dried apple into the dough, pinches the edges like a secret, and flips them into the steamer. Steam fogs the lid, and when she lifts it, a silver plume exhales that smells of sweetness and warmth. She hands Seamus a bun, and watches him close his eyes for the fraction of a moment that says, the food has reached the place inside him where memory sits. All the while, the refuge keeps its low commentary. Timber expands and breathes with the warmth, a soft creak that comes to mean comfort after so much time. The stove sighs and then murmurs a steady note. Little tasks are done in tandem. A string is passed across the table. A handful of sugar crystals are wrapped delicately in paper. Someone fetches a tray. Conversation threads start and break like light across water. Rose tells of a stubborn sprout. Seamus offers a small anecdote about a peg he once lashed back into place on a wind-swept eve. The twins argue over the exact angle at which a sugar shard will scatter the sun. There is no hurry. The refuge encourages slowness. It shapes the day to the pace of the things it houses. People drift in and out of each other's stories as if those stories are coats hung on pegs. Taken when needed, left when they are warm. It is while Lily is arranging the lamps on the sill that she notices the fault. In the observation alcove, where the glass stretches wide and true, a faint seam runs like a hairline across the lower quadrant. Not a clear break, nothing dramatic, but a narrow delamination in the seal that lets a condensation find a new path. A slender thread of mist slips through at the edge and beads along the inner lead, and where it pushes its way past the glass, there is a small whisper of cold that makes the varnish near the frame look older. She stands very still, one hand on a lamp, watching the way the mist gathers. It is the sort of thing that could be ignored. Many things at the refuge want attention, and there is a long forgive written into these walls. Repair waits. People wait. Tea waits. 1,000 small conveniences are given precedence every morning, so that company can continue to be company. Lily thinks of the seam as a pebble in a shoe, rather than a crack in the wall. She tells herself the sea will settle, that they will address it later. She tucks the thought away in the part of her mind that is good at storing errands for the afternoon. Perhaps they will seal it with beeswax. Perhaps Seamus will stitch something across it. Perhaps they will make a small decorative cover and call it a festival. For now there are buns to be eaten, hands to be warmed, a row of lamps to set so the light will be soft for eyes that have not yet fully opened. Leave it for now, Seamus says, as if reading the thought she has not spoken. He sits with his bun and the brass button on the palm of his hand. "There'll be time," he adds. Seamus's approval is an ordinary thing. It settles a corner of Lily's chest the way a blanket smooths a crease. Yet the seam does not depart from her attention. It becomes a small, steady motif. The hairline that she notices when she stirs the pot, the faint dampness she sees on a favorite blanket she left under the window, the whisper of mischief in the twins' sticky fingers when a sugar shard slides from their palms. The refuge is full of seams. Everything here is stitched and restitched and mended because weather and usage invite it. The building knows the language of small repair as well as it knows the sound of rain. They pass the morning in a loop of comforts. Lily shows Rose how she strains the tea, folding a scrap of muslin over the mouth of the pot and pressing the leaves with the back of a spoon until the amber liquor pours clean. Rose, in return, draws out a tiny notch of root from her pocket and offers it as a seed for the kitchen planter. Seamus offers the brass button to Lily with a look that says, "Keep it close." The twins enact a ceremony of their own, positioning the sugar crystals on the parchment and binding them with thread, careful as priests. At one point a young neighbor from the upper bunk arrives, cheeks bright and eyebrows earnest, bearing a small tin. "Found this in the shed," they say, and the tin opens to reveal a roll of thin film. Oiled vellum, almost translucent, the stuff of window mending and old lanterns. It is, in the parlance of the refuge, an offering. People accept such things without question. They are currencies of care, a strip of leather, a tin of beeswax, a bent needle, a length of thread that glows like a fine filament. The twins, unsatisfied with sugar alone, invent decorations from scraps. Mara insists that a piece should look like a cloud if cut in a certain way. Joss counters by folding the parchment to imitate the way the mountain shadows fall at dusk. They work with intent. Fingers sticky with syrup, tongues peeking out at the corner when concentration is great. Their hands create small miracles. The simplest cut in the right place becomes an ornament, and ornaments are the refugee's holy objects. As afternoon moves toward the flatter slant of early evening, the talk turns, almost inevitably, to mending. Not because the crack has become a crisis, but because the very act of being together loosens the world into its proper shape. Items are sorted, materials are shown, hands that have the right knowledge linger and offer it. The seam in the observation alcove becomes less a nuisance than an excuse for assembly. There is something in the refuge's culture that likes to make work of a problem together. The repair is a reason to be neighborly that is not theatrical but quietly practical. "Shall we do it now, then?" Rose asks, and the question is both practical and ceremonial. It is the kind of small decision that is its own celebration. Lily hesitates again. A part of her, the part that keeps lists and knows the order of things, imagines the glass will keep until morning. Another part wants to turn the act of mending into a thing to be shared. She looks at Seamus with the button, at Rose with the sprout, at the twins whose eyes gleam bright at the prospect of anything that involves glue and thread. She thinks of the hourglass on the mantel, the sand a slow promise, and decides that bread and company will not suffer for a small interruption. "Bring the film," she says at last, her voice soft but decisive. "And the wax, if anyone has it." Hands move. A length of leather is unrolled. It smells faintly of smoke and old oil. Beeswax clinks in a small tin as if it were a bell. Needles are found. One for leather, thin and blunt enough to pass without tearing. One sharper for the fine parchment. An old awl appears, and a thimble as dimpled as a world. The twins clap because anything that promises an excuse to tie threads pleases them immensely. There is a small, gentle choreography to the beginning of the repair. Lily clears a space on the table and spreads a cloth. She hands Seamus the brass button, and he considers it, turning it in his fingers like a small meditation on usefulness. Rose retrieves a spool of thread that comes in a color between cloud white and stone, and the young neighbor offers the film with the shy pride of someone who has brought something unexpectedly perfect. They place things into the center of the table as if setting down offerings. A strip of leather, a sheet of translucent film, a small brass button, a tin of wax, a length of thread, a pair of scissors with worn handles. Talk becomes quieter, more intent. They discuss method in low voices, stitching through leather, then adhering film as a secondary seal, then finishing with a decorative border that will keep eyes pleased as much as hands. Seamus suggests a thicker stitch near the frame, anchoring the leather with a small brass button at the corner. Rose, practical as ever, asks for a thin wash of warmed wax before they fit the film. The wax will set and make the seal forgiving. The twins argue about whether to color the stitches or to leave them plain. They are thinking of how the seam will look when the lanterns are lit and the glass fractures light into 1,000 small jewels. It is tempting, in these moments, to linger on the craft itself. The leather has a grain that catches in the light. When Rose smooths it with the pad of her thumb, it gives a quiet sigh. Thread slides through fingers like a ribbon. The awl makes a tiny hollowing sound as it bores the first hole. A small curl of wood dust lifts and settles. They measure, they fold, they tuck. Everything is done with a slowness almost ceremonious. No speed here, only rhythm. Someone lays a small cloth over the crack to test how the film might sit. The twins pass the sugar-shard cloud windows up to the rafters to catch the last of the light. For a moment, the room is a scatter of little fires. Lily watches the way the light falls through an ice-bright shard, and thinks of the way this mending is already becoming a new set of memories. A second skin placed over something that has begun to breathe in an odd way. The work gathers neighbors who are not yet present. A baker who sleeps in the south wing drifts in because he has an eye for knots and cannot resist the urge to help with a stitch. A woman who makes lamps brings a small spool of wire that will hold the film taut. People arrive with knowledge tucked into their pockets and with tools that look unremarkable until they are needed, when they take on the shine of essential things. The room is full of minor noises that are all at once domestic and sacred. The light rasp of thread through leather, the soft scrape of scissors on the cloth, the distant thrumming of the Refuge's veins. When someone laughs, the sound slips into the seam of conversation like a stitch. When someone coughs, a hand pats the back with the buttery kindness of habit. It is in this attentive darkness that Lily pauses and thinks of the Refuge as a body. Its panes are like eyes, its beams like ribs, its hearth like a throat that speaks warmth. To mend it is to perform an act of intimate care. She feels the responsibility not as weight, but as belonging. It is the simplest kind of belonging, the sort that is reciprocal and immediate. They do not hurry. An hour is nothing when many hands make light of work. Lily takes the leather in both hands, lays it against the glass, and folds it gently to see how it will sit. She measures with a strip of thread, eyes squinted with concentration. Seamus takes the awl, his fingers sure and slow. Rose heats the wax over a spoon and breathes the scent of honey into the room. The twins find small pegs and pretend they are fastening flags. The young neighbor tapes the film in a mock-up, crudely at first, then more precisely as someone under a watchful eye. And then, at the exact moment when the afternoon is thinning into that pale, expectant light that precedes twilight, someone mentions music. It begins as a hum, a low, wordless vibration from the back of someone's throat, the kind of tune that rises in the refuge without prelude. One neighbor starts it as if waking a memory. Another joins with a soft syllable. A child contributes a tiny, earnest note that misses the pitch but fits the heart. The hum is not a song so much as a communal sound, and as it threads through the work, the sewing becomes quieter, and the hands move with a cadence like breathing. They test the first stitch and the leather resists and then gives, and Lily feels the pull through the palm of her hand. A small electric certainty. The needle catches the hide and comes back out, leaving a neat, rounded hole that takes the thread without complaint. Seamus ties off a knot with practiced fingers, a motion so simple she marvels at its economy. Rose coats the thread in wax with a practiced flick so it will slide, but not fray. The twins watch as if watching a miracle. Their faces are lit in the honey light, freckles shadowed like tiny topographies. There is a minor mishap, a prick of the thumb that makes a red bloom and a small sharp intake of breath. But it is mended by immediate care. A damp cloth, an apologetic smile, an exclamation of no note. No drama, only the short human chorus of minor wounds, and the skillful hands that soothe them. The tins and tools keep their quiet dignity, like seasoned workers who have always known how to be useful. As they work, stories drift like the steam from the teapot. Seamus tells the one about an eave he once fixed with a button and a strip of leather, and how, in the strangest way, that tiny repair kept the house warm through a winter of howling wind. Rose speaks of a seed that took 3 winters to decide to sprout, and how she thought of it often when things seemed stuck. The twins recount, breathless, the time they hung a sugar cloud that shattered perfectly at midnight and filled the room with a snowfall of crystal. Each anecdote is short, a pebble tossed into the larger pool. The ripples are the things they will return to when the stitchwork is done, and memory has had time to set. When the first round of stitches is in place and the film is held with gentle, careful tension, they step back to look. The seam still talks in small ways, but now it has an intention. The leather frames the film like a soft rim, and the brass button, anchoring at the corner, catches the lamplight like an eye. The twins approve with serious nods. The baker suggests an extra dab of wax along the inner edge, and Lily obliges, patient and deliberate, because each small course seems to require its own attentiveness. There is a kind of festival in the completion of a single honest task. No ribbons, no declared feasts. Instead, there is a plate of cloud bread and honey laid out on a splintered tray, a passing round of mugs, the comfortable noise of people settling into the idea that the immediate work is done. The hum of the refuge seems to deepen, as if contentment itself has changed its tone. In the observation alcove, the light now comes through the mended panel and fractures in delicate ways. The film makes 1,000 soft suns in miniature. The night that gathers beyond the window folds the clouds into richer grays, and the first thin threads of rain begin to sketch themselves against the glass. And yet, though a first mending has been made, the seam calls for more than a single day's attention. There is talk of finishing a decorative flap, of stitching a border, of creating a small ornamental cover that will also act as an extra layer of guardianship. Someone suggests they hang a chain of cloud windows across the top of the frame to catch whatever light comes and to announce the house's care to anyone passing by the ledge. Another voice wonders if the repaired pane might do better with an inner shutter that they can draw when the wind sings. Lily feels the evening tilt as if on the edge of a breath. The communal mending tonight has been more than practical. It has tightened threads among people. Faces are softened by lamplight. Hands are dusted with flour and beeswax. There is a sense, subtle and abiding, that repairing an object repairs something of the self. This thought stays with her, a quiet warmth in the place that sometimes protests the demands of the world. They do not finish the seam tonight. The decision is practical and generous. There is a time for rest and a time for work, and neither should choke the other. Instead, they lay out what must be ready for tomorrow. The spare lengths of leather, the roll of film, the tin with wax warmed and cooled for easy use. The hourglass is turned, and the sand begins to run in its familiar patient measure. It marks the end of the day's immediate work and the beginning of necessary sleep. As people begin to drift to their rooms or curl into chairs with a soft blanket, Lily lingers by the observation alcove. She rests her palm on the wooden frame where the leather has been pinned in place, feeling the warmth passed through cedar and skin. The view below has gone to the deeper hues of impending night. Thunderclouds are now a low, rolling bulk, and somewhere in the unseen distance light flashes quietly, as if applause from a very far theater. She picks up a small worn mug, runs a thumb over its hairline scar, the one that has held together many mornings, and tucks it beneath the lamp. The Refuge hums, the kettle's final breath gone long ago, and the lamps are low and kind. Lily feels the day's small labors settle into their proper pockets. The bread that fed hands, the stitch that will protect sight, the story that floated on air and enriched a dozen private histories. Beyond the alcove, the twins are already whispering to each other about the next day's decorations. Seamus is cleaning his tools with a care explained by the touch of habit. Rose is counting seedlings on her palms as if they were coins. The room is lit with the soft glow of many small fires. Lamps, lanterns, the gentle excitement of people who will sleep and awaken to do this again. And as the refugee settles, a new current moves through the table where the materials lie. The beginning of a plan that is more than the mending itself. Someone suggests sewing a pocket into the leather to tuck small charms, cloud windows, buttons, pieces of sugar glass, into the seam as a kind of blessing. Another offers to make a strap that will make the cover easy to adjust from the inside. The baker speaks of a ribbon that will loop the button and keep the flap secure. Lily listens, her mind making small notes against the silence. She reaches out for a needle, just to feel its coolness in her fingers, to let her hands remember the loop of thread. The room holds its breath in a way that is not literal, but almost like a collective pause. Outside, the clouds shift and the thunder mutters as if in agreement. The needle rests against her palm, heavy with the memory of the first stitch they have made, and promising the weight of those to come. It is a good place to stop, she thinks, the point at which planning tiptoes toward action. There is a soft thrill in the pause. They will begin again in the morning. They will finish what night will not let them finish. But, for now, the refuge keeps its hum. The lamps keep their small suns, and the seam, part mended, part dream, waits for dawn. Dawn comes on the second day, like the turning of a careful page. Light eases itself through the high windows with the patience of something that has waited before, and the refuge answers with a small chorus of settling sounds. A beam sighs. The stove exhales a lazy breath. A pair of shutters rub gently as if rubbing sleepy eyes. Lily wakes because the light needs waking, and because the hourglass at the mantel has tracked a good measure of rest. For a moment she lies very still, listening to the house arrange itself around the new day. The mended leather at the observation alcove sends back a steadier note, as if pleased to be noticed again. She dresses in the plain, soft way that suits early work. Woolen socks that have been darned enough times to memorize the shape of her feet. A shirt whose cuffs carry the faint smudge of soot from 100 stirs of soup. The air at this altitude is thin and keen, so she breathes through her mouth at first, letting the cool enter and wake her fingers. She stands for a while at the window, hands resting on the warm wood where the leather has been pinned, and watches the cloud sea roll like slow water. Bands of thunderclouds lie like islands in white foam. Somewhere beyond them, lightning slips quietly across the sky, and the sound of it moves within the clouds rather than out into the world. It is a theater of weather that is impressive without being threatening. It makes the refuge feel more like a vessel on an enormous, gentle tide. There is soft ceremony to the morning tasks. The kettle is coaxed back to life on the stove. Lily uses last night's embers to bring water to the exacting point she prefers. She measures flour by feel for the next batch of cloud bread, squeezing and testing until the dough yields in the manner she wants. Supple, holding a slight memory of pressure. The spiced filling is warmed gently. Dried apple rehydrated with a touch of tea. Ground cinnamon and cloves stirred in until the scent rises like a private chapter. She folds the dough in the same patient way she always does, letting each pinch seal a small promise. While the bread steams, she prepares the rest of the materials for the day's work. Where the table had been a gallery of offerings the evening before, it is now an open field of purpose. A roll of film smoothed flat, strips of leather stacked by grain and color, twines coiled, and a small wooden box with a range of small brass buckles and spare buttons. She makes a list in the order of her hands: wax, needle, awl, thread. And for each item she remembers who brought what the day before, as if each tool wears its donor's rhythm. The hourglass sits near the edge, sand asleep in its lower chamber until it is needed again. People begin to come without the abruptness of an appointment. Neighborly life here is the slow kind of punctuality that answers the invitation of a shared purpose. Seamus arrives first with his cane, which taps a measured greeting on the flagstones. He carries, tucked under his arm, an old leather sheath he thought might yield usable scrap. "Found more than I expected," he says, and smiles in the way that suggests he has discovered something useful and also pleasingly unexpected. Rose appears with more seedlings, each in paper pots, arranging them in a line on the sill where light will touch them through the day. The twins come in with pockets full of the little ornaments they finished in the night. Sugar shards threaded with thin wire and oiled parchment, cut into fanciful shapes. They all take up their places as if they were settling into pews at a comfortable concert. None of them is hurried. The baker from the south wing arrives too, wiping his hands on his apron. He has brought a fresh tray of small, warm scones, more for sugar than for wheat, and the smell of butter makes the room open its chest. A woman who mends lanterns comes with a spool of fine wire and a small tin of lacquer. She sets her kit down with the deliberation of someone who knows exactly where each tiny thing will be used. Conversations are the kind that continue as hands move. Seamus tells the same story in a new seam of detail, the time he tied a button to an eave that was doing the same sort of leaking, and how, paradoxically, that small fix kept out the worst drafts for a whole winter. Rose hums through the tale of an obstinate seed that took 3 years to agree to sprout. She says she learned patience from it, which is a gentle way of saying the seed taught her how to keep tending without knowing the end. The twins argue softly over whether a cloud window should hang high or low. They imagine it will scatter the light differently at dusk, and in their conjecture is the pleasure of design for design's sake. They set to work with a choreography that has grown familiar. Lily lays out the leather first, choosing a panel that complements the grain of the new film. She presses it into a curve with the warmth of her palms, testing suppleness and edge. Seamus holds the awl. His hands have a steadiness born of repetition. Rose warms a spoon over a tiny flame and melts beeswax until it glosses like honey. Someone fetches a shallow bowl with hot water so they may dip a cloth to tamp any small bleeding of thread. Safety and care are made present by little domestic instruments. Before any sewing begins, they prepare the surfaces. The film must be trimmed to size, edges eased with a rounded bit of bone that Rose keeps tucked in her apron for smoothing. Lily measures twice, cuts once, and passes the trimmed film to the woman with the spool of wire, who tacks it temporarily to the frame with tiny folds. The leather panel is pared at the edges with the careful blade of the baker. He keeps his tools sharp for dough but is equally deft with a knife. And the pair of surfaces is tested together as though fitting two old friends. The stitch they choose is an honest and reliable one, a variation on the simple saddle stitch where 2 threads pass and cross through each hole, giving strength and a pleasing symmetry. It takes time, but it bears the kind of security that is the Refuge's creed. Thread is waxed in preparation. Rose takes a strip of beeswax on the spoon and rubs it along the twine until the fibers take on a glossy coat that will make them slide without fraying. Seamus, with the practiced motion of a man who has always known the economy of hand, takes the awl and marks regular points along the leather, the holes like a row of tiny, awaiting mouths. Lily reminds herself to slow each movement until the rhythm of the room matches the motion of her needle. The first hole takes the thread with an almost apologetic ease. The needle bites and emerges, leaving a neat loop. There is a tiny thrill at each pass, an old, steady joy, because to stitch is to make continuity. The twins watch so closely, their breath comes in held little catches. Sometimes they catch themselves humming along to the low sound that has begun to thread through the room. It is the same hum as before, but today it seems to learn new notes as more bodies and hands join it. Mid-morning becomes something like a stitch in time, episodic, patient, and rewarded. A minor challenge appears when a hole tears a fraction larger than intended. For a moment they stop, hands paused in air, and each person leans in, not with alarm, but with curiosity. The woman with the spool suggests reinforcing the torn spot with a small patch of inner fabric, soft and forgiving. Rose produces a scrap of wool from her apron, and they glue it with a light wash of warmed wax, letting the patch set under the press of a flat spoon. Such improvisation is the Refuge's craft, practical, economical, and beautifully domestic. As hands work, stories continue to thread the air. The baker speaks of the precise moment he learned to recognize the difference between a good crust and a proud one. The woman who mends lamps details the patience required for lacquer to accept a second coat without clouding. These are not lectures, but shared notes. Each anecdote is a way of teaching by offering the memory of a mistake or a discovery. Children learn not by being told, but by repeating the small motions under watchful eyes. The twins are taught how to tie a secure knot. Their small fingers fumble, but learn the gesture. There is beauty in how practical moments become tender. At one point, Lily finds her needle snag on an old, hidden splinter in the wood, and winces. Seamus, without fuss, takes the needle from her and finishes the pass himself, then presses a cooling cloth to the spot she had worried would ache. There is no speech about it. The action itself is the language of care. Later, when the stitch line is long and the leather frames the film like a soft halo, each person steps back and looks as if at a creature newly dressed for a party. Decoration is the part that makes mending into festival. The twins' cloud windows are threaded along a thin cord and draped across the top of the frame. Each shard catches lamplight and throws it into a scatter that makes the mended seam glitter like a constellation. They work on a border. Simple embroidered loops in a pale, stone-colored thread that Rose says will mimic the motion of clouds. Someone suggests leaving a small pocket sewn into the leather for charms. Lily likes the idea because it turns the seam into a receptacle for small remembrances. They cut a neat square, line it with soft wool to keep the contents warm, and sew it into the inner edge of the leather. Into that pocket, each person is invited to tuck something small: a button, a tiny scrap of the twins' sugar, a seed from Rose's pocket, a curl of thread from Seamus's bag. It is the kind of ritual that has no doctrine, but holds meaning in the act itself. As afternoon stretches, the mending nears completion. The brass button, Seamus's donation, finds its place at a corner, secured with leather thongs so it will not merely sit, but will take its role in holding the new flap in place. They fashion a loop from the thinnest of leather strips and stitch it with a careful hand until it fits the button's girth like the closing of a palm. The loop is not only functional, it is a little flourish that says, "This house takes pleasure in small finishes." When the final pass is made, someone holds up a lamp so they can see the seam in full light. The film stretches without bubble or tear. The leather borders it like a frame. The cloud windows overhead quiver as a breeze comes through a half-open vent, and the shards scatter light in small, moving spears. For a long moment, no one speaks. The house hums with the satisfied note of completion, and, beneath it, the human chorus of gentle breathing. It is time for the small celebration they had only hinted at the night before. They set a tray down on the table and load it with cloud bread warmed for the occasion. Honey dribbled in little spirals, a bowl of spiced tea, and a pot of preserves Rose had been hoarding for just such a moment. The twins decorate a tiny flag and pin it to the leg of the tray as if bestowing laurels. People pass the food around with the quiet thrift of those who understand that abundance is measured by warmth, not by quantity. They celebrate not because the work was heroic, but because it was done together. Their hum shifts into a wordless tune. Someone begins to hum the opening line of an old refrain, the kind of melody that everyone knows but no one is certain of the origin, and soon others take it up. The tune is more like a phrase than a song, but it echoes up into the rafters and settles into the beams, as if the house absorbed it and returned the sound in a fuller key. Children clap along, keeping time with the gentle percussion of spoon on mug. There is laughter, soft, pleased, uncomplaining. In the gathering glow, the twins fall asleep at last. Mara's head finds the rim of a cushion, and she wakens only to shift and dream on. Joss, having spent much of the day threading and unthreading a knot, finally lets his head drop, and his breathing becomes a little drum. Someone tucks a spare blanket around them like a pair of small sails drawn tight. The adults move with the tenderness of people who know that when children sleep in public places, a kind of protection comes into being. Hands move to a cup. A hand smooths a brow. A whisper arranges a toy into a child's hand. As night thickens and the cloud sea darkens to a velvet gray, the lanterns and the little oil panels are adjusted until the light is soft and far from intrusive. Lily stands for a moment by the observation alcove and places her palm upon the leather cover. The stitches are neat and the film breathes calmly. There is a warmth that travels through wood to her palm like a small, private conversation. She slips her other hand into the pocket sewn into the flap and finds, tucked there, the tiny things they had agreed to leave. Seamus's brass button, Rose's seed, a small shard of sugar polished into something like a tear, a curled piece of thread. She smiles at the weight of them, at how a series of tiny things can yield a sense of surplus. They make a small vow, not out loud, not solemn, but agreed by the small ritual of their hands. When someone travels beyond the refuge for more than a day, they will leave a token in the pocket. When the house needs mending again, the pocket will hold memories to ease the work. It is an arrangement both practical and oddly sacred in its domesticity. Later, after people have dispersed to their beds or to chairs with comfortable throws, Lily wanders around the refuge performing the small final tasks that close the day. She tucks a plate of cloud bread by the low sill for any late traveler who might arrive and need a warm welcome. She sets the hourglass back on the mantel and gives it a gentle turn so its sand will remind the rooms that rest has its own counting. She trims a lamp wick until it gives a clean, blue-tipped flame that will not smoke the newly laundered curtains. Each action is measured and unexceptional. Taken together, they read like a short prayer of tidiness. Before she goes to bed, she pulls the inner shutter into place for a moment, not to hide the world, but to feel the difference 3 breaths make when the light changes. The shutter's weight is friendly. The small chain that holds it gives under a practiced touch. When she opens it again, the view is a new drawing. The cloud windows scatter lamplight into a soft meteor shower. The film of the mended pane catches it and throws it back in a gentle shimmer. The thundercloud islands have become darker, and their edges glow faintly with the occasional quiet of distant light. Looking out, Lily thinks of the home they have sewn together, literally and figuratively, and she feels that rare, particular ease that accompanies belonging that has been earned rather than demanded. She prepares for bed with the same careful attention. A cup of mild tea is made, chamomile warmed with a sliver of orange peel, poured into her ribbed gray cup. She places the cup on the sill beside a small charm she has taken from her own pocket, a tiny strip of leather punched into a token and impressed with a thumbprint. It sits there like a little map of her hands. She slips under the blanket with a lightness that surprises her. The day's labor is pleasant, not exhausting, and the sound of the refuge around her is like being wrapped in a slow, familiar song. The twins' quiet breathing is a kind of lullaby. From the common room comes the soft rattle of someone turning the last page of a book, and the muted creak of a chair being set for the night. In the corridor, a lamp is left with its face turned down to protect sleepy eyes. Footsteps that once carried purpose now carry only the tiny concern of wandering to one's own place. The refuge settles deeper as more bodies join its envelope, each person giving up their small share of wakefulness to the house's keeping. Lily lies in the shallow dark and considers the day's sequence: notice, postpone, gather, mend, celebrate, rest, and feels the pattern like the tread of a comfortable shoe. She thinks of the seam as something that will loosen and tauten over seasons, needing attention at times and forgiving at others. There is no triumph in the thought, only a plain, contented certainty that life here will be stitched and restitched as needed. The pocket in the flap will swell with tokens. The film will weather glints, and the leather will darken with handling. Each change will have its own small ceremony. Before she gives herself fully to sleep, she reaches for the hourglass and turns it again, the sand starting its slow descent as if to say, "Now is the time to let go." She places the tiny thumbprint charm beneath her pillow, where old habits lodge. It is not superstition so much as an old habit of keeping a token close, someone to touch in the dark and remember home. She breathes in. The house breathes with her. Inhale. Hold for a heartbeat. Exhale. Let the day's small pleasures lay gentle and quiet. There are 2 moments she keeps for herself as the night settles. One is practical. The last look at the observation alcove, where the stitched border frames the new film and the cloud window's lantern sends down freckles of light. The other is a brief ruminative pleasure, the private knowing that the seam will be tended again, that repair has become a ritual among them. Both are consolations. And then, softly, she remembers the person who might be listening now, somewhere beyond the wood and the clouds, pressed into their own bed or settled in armchair light. She imagines them breathing with the same slow, kind cadence and offers, as one might offer a folded blanket through a letter, a single invitation. Breathe with us for a while. Match your breathing to the hum of a house and let it ease the edges of the day. No demand, only a kindness extended. Outside, the clouds hold their deep, patient music. A distant flash, like a visiting thought, passes behind the darker bands, and the thunder speaks in the way that applauding clouds do. Soft, respectful, and far enough away to be only beautiful. Inside, the refuge keeps its low, contented murmur, and the lamps make private constellations across the wood. People sleep. The twins' small hands are tangled with scraps and thread in dream. Seamus rests with his cane at the door, vigilant in the way of those who have lived much and know the value of a well-placed watch. Rose counts seedlings in a sleep where she tends them and coaxes them into light. Lily turns over and lets herself fall into sleep in the steady, domestic way that comes from having worked and eaten and laughed in one place on the same day. The last thought that threads through her awareness is simply of the seam, round and whole for the moment, both a protection and an emblem of the tiny labors that keep a house breathing. Somewhere in the night, a small chain of cloud windows swings and makes a faint, crystalline tinkle as if signaling to the stars. Later, in the deep hours when the refuge is mostly dark and the lamps are lowered to the barest glow, a quiet figure moves. It is Lily, up in the hush that follows long sleep, not from waking but from a sense that something should be given a gentle attention. She pads to the common room in bare feet that remember the cold, and there she straightens a lamp that had tilted, smooths a blanket folded askew, and pours water into a spare cup for any traveler who may come by the dawn. These are small ministrations, the kind that are not noticed until they are not done. They are the sort of care that keeps the refugee hospitable by habit. Finally, she returns to the observation alcove and stands watching the clouds. The place feels different in the empty hours. The stitches are moonlit, the brass button catching the faintest gleam. The pocket in the leather breathes with the small bulk of tokens, a private catalogue of the friends who have passed hands through its opening. Lily runs a thumb across the seam without thinking, feeling for any tiny prod of roughness, and finds only the smooth line of thread and the soft recoil of leather. The house's hum finds a tone that matches the rhythm of her own heartbeat in the quiet. She draws her cloak about her shoulders and lets a few final breaths lengthen, each one following the pattern of the refuge. Slow in, slow out, until her shoulders loosen and the tension at her throat unknots. She thinks of anyone listening, those who have come here for a single evening of quiet, those who find comfort in the small economy of mending and making, those who need permission to let their eyes fall heavy. She offers, without ceremony and without pretext, a single gentle permission to let go. Breathe with the house now. Let your shoulders unball, let your jaw slacken, let the refugee's low hum be the pillow against which your own thought rests. Imagine the warm cup at your side, the taste of gentle citrus and chamomile at the tip of your tongue, the soft texture of a blanket tucked close. If your world is loud, picture the cloud windows catching lamplight and throwing it in small, harmless stars across a wood table. When you are ready, dim the light where you are. Allow your eyes to close on the soft image of a repaired pane and the quiet company of neighbors who have stitched with you in spirit. The house will keep its vigil. The seam will hold. The pocket will gather tokens. The world presses on with its weather, and here, above the sea of clouds, a house keeps gentle time. Good night from the Mountain Refuge. If you would like more evenings like this, you can follow for another visit.